Welcome to Built to Finish. I'm your host, Stephen Pivnik. Join me each week as we explore the journeys of audacious goal setters. This includes experienced founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs sharing pivotal moments that propel their success. We'll also be talking with endurance athletes who push the limits of physical and mental ability. This show is brought to you by Acresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services to help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Let's get started. Today's guest is an accomplished entrepreneur, investor, and founder with a proven track record of successfully building and exiting multiple businesses. He has dedicated his career to helping fellow founders achieve their business goals. Through a combination of strategic guidance, hands-on expertise, and deep industry insights, he and his team provide invaluable counsel to founders looking to scale, exit, or optimize their business and wealth. He is the founding partner at Acresis LLC. Mark Hodges, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to see you. And I think November was roughly 5 years since your binary tree exit.
Something like that. Yeah, it's interesting. Like you've got a really unique perspective, which I can't wait for you to share because I've got a lot of
Mm.
questions, and you can answer them both from your own business exit experience as well as the 33 now business exits that you've helped other founders achieve.
Yes, as the last quarter, 33 successful exits over 8 years, of which yours was certainly one of those.
Yeah, I think we were number 17. Not that I'm counting.
Yeah, I think that's right. Good prime number for us.
Exactly. So let's just start off with the end in mind. When you decided that it was time to sell the business, what was the top two strategies that you put into place that really maximized the outcome for everybody?
So I'll speak personally, and then if you want to go on to our clients, I'm happy to do that. For me personally, it was pretty easy because I had a majority owner, and the majority owner said, "I want to sell." He had a couple inbound
Okay.
offers from different buyers to come in. One of them was a pretty good offer. I think uh, what should have been done and designing with the end in mind, and I learned on my second, third, and fourth companies was um, it's good to be a majority owner or at least have a significant vote on whether you go or not. Um, Also, your capital choice, whether you bootstrap or you take professional money, has a lot of pros and cons to it. And then also, most founders, including myself with my first company, I didn't really think about who would ever buy the company. Barely
Right.
crossed my mind. And now it's one of the most important things that, I thought about my other companies, um, about how to do that. But when you started Binary Tree, were you thinking about who the buyers were going to be?
Unfortunately, absolutely not. We had no idea who a potential buyer was going to be in the future. We were just very happy as founders to be living the entrepreneurial dream.
Absolutely. And I know from having worked with you jointly on Acresis clients, there is a method to it, if you have the time and the patience for it. And when we help clients think through what they want to do, there's normally 6 questions we ask them. And when you start a company, it'd be nice if you had the answer to those 6 questions.
Yeah, and in a perfect world, right? That would be great.
The questions, if you don't mind, because they sound very simple, but they're very profound and have lots of financial and emotional consequences. Number one is, what is your time horizon and what's your exit date? When you and I started talking through that, it was hard to decide. Was it 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? And that's, in a perfect world. Um, a second one is, what's your dollar figure number? What's the gross purchase price that gets you what you need? And if you have co-founders, it's a fraction. You have to divide that. And then the third question is something Acresis calls the proceeds waterfall, which you've seen a number of times. And that takes the purchase price, and then there's all these unfortunate deductions for founders: tax, legal, equity you give your management team, maybe you have a banker, et cetera, et cetera. And then what drips out of the bottom for the founders may not be enough. So we see the founders stretch out their exit to that to try to get um, the number they need requires 1 or 2 or 3 years more operation than they thought. The third one, which we can go into later, is do you have the right management team around you? Um, the fifth one is, do I have the right advisor? So do I have the right tax? Do I have the right wealth manager? Am I using Acresis? And there's just all these professionals that cost money that are the team that take you over the finish line. And to double click on the wealth management, if you have a professional wealth manager, normally your exit date can be moved up, not back. And we can talk about that later too, if we have time on this podcast.
No, sure. I mean, those are all great questions to ponder and to have answers for. So let's just segue right into one of them. Regarding the
Mm.
team, I know that's incredibly important, and you and I talk about teams a lot. When you were building your team at your companies, what were some of the qualities and values that you looked for and prioritized in key hires?
Yeah, for my first company, I hired people who I can afford. That was the first thing. Second thing, they were friends and trusted people that I had got to know through university or high school or in other social circles. Um, and then you get to a point in time years after where some grow with the company and other ones you realize it didn't make much sense. So it's not necessarily a mistake to hire who you can afford, but if you thought about the capital requirements of the business, you might start that business a little bit differently so you can get professionals in certain key roles like finance and accounting and sales instead of who I adore, really loyal amateurs.
All of that sounds incredibly familiar.
Yeah, I think on the talent side, just one that is always a painful one in certain ways is the CEO, because clients that Acresis works with are usually first-time founders, but uh, they're almost always subject matter experts in the business they started. They aren't necessarily a CFO or a CEO. And when you have um, a CEO who's a subject matter expert and usually one of the celebrities in the industry that they compete and participate in, it's hard to imagine anybody being the CEO of that company other than that person. But it does happen. And there's some other key roles we can talk about later if you wish. But and the CEO one is, what's the impetus for the CEO to get out of that chair? It feels good to be boss. You're running your village, you've brought all these people in, they adore you. Your company, Binary Tree, was a great example. You looked at employee surveys and tenure, how long those employees were in the business, and they were really happy to be there, and I witnessed that with my own eyes. But to step outside yourself and say, well, could this business be better or exit more successfully if someone else was in that chair, is a very emotional uh, decision, and a lot of your identity is wrapped up into it. So I know you have some thoughts and experiences you've shared with our clients on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not unlike any other founder. I was definitely very wrapped up in my own baby. Often I couldn't see the forest through the trees, and I felt that somebody else in the CEO chair could make better decisions and scale the company quicker without being encumbered by a lot of the history and some of the drama that was present, which is inevitable for most companies. But yeah, it's incredibly emotional either way, whether you stay in that chair and continue to drive the ship forward, or whether you step aside and let somebody else do it for you.
Yes, and you and I have talked with many companies that have that topic, and normally a founder will confess to you, like, "Well, do you think I should be CEO?" And then the question is, "Well, do you do a formal performance management process, like a 360, and hear what people really think the job that you're doing or not?" But at some point, what Acresis has found, and it's a fair question, if I'm the CEO founder, I don't really know what good looks like. I know what I see on TV or I hear on podcasts or I read in Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates, or there's just so many fantastic leaders. But, for my village, my team, the people I hired, who will they follow? And if I bring someone in, they might alienate them. And then I'm left with nothing. And then I have to start programming again or start selling again because half my company left because I hired this, idiot. So what does good look like? And, the best way to do that is to rotate potential heirs, potential replacements, um, at dinners, at certain employee events, at maybe hire them on your advisory board so that you and the company get to know them. And then if you do make the hire, in, in addition to the communication program you have to put in place, where normally that CEO founder will be the executive chairman of the board, you have to have a real board of directors process, and you have to measure that CEO and not just let them drag it out. Because if they don't work, you want to tell your team, didn't work, but we already have the backup. You've already met her. She's been on the advisory board. This one didn't work out, but it will work out. And I think, Stephen, one of the most profound statements I've heard with other founders around was, I lobbed a question at you at some roundtable dinner get together, and I said, so you were 6 months after handing the reins over to someone. What did you think? What was it like? And you had some really amusing comments on that. Do you remember?
I do. In my personal experience, and I've shared this multiple times, I was super skeptical and nervous that somebody could run my
Mhm.
baby as well as I could. So I was
Right.
hesitant to give somebody the CEO title immediately. So what I did was
Hmm.
hire somebody as a COO first, and I was going to give that a year before, to see if I
Hmm.
respected, and if the company liked and respected the individual before I completely handed over the reins. And it did not take a year. It took a whopping 3 months, and I immediately knew that I had the right person in place. And right there and then, I could either say I fired myself as CEO or I promoted myself to executive chairman and let him run the company going forward.
You did both. Your lack of ego allowed you to still report to him in a operating role, but you're also his boss as a board of directors. But I remember about 6 months after the handover, I said, how's it going? And you go, oh, it's great. I should have done it a year earlier.
There you go. I knew you would remember my exact words. Yeah, and you know what? The same goes for a lot of really tough decisions. When you're hemming and hawing
Hmm.
over decisions, whether it's about hiring somebody or firing somebody or upgrading a specific position, when those tough decisions are finally made, the number one response is typically, "Oh, I should have done this a lot sooner."
Or your team tells you that.
Exactly. Exactly. So going back to the sale, there's a lot of components to the sale and exit of a business, but at the top of the list is valuation. How did you control the valuation and negotiation process, and what advice would you give founders looking to maximize the valuation on their business?
So, on the valuation of a business, there's always a number that is sometime unknown to the founder, but there's a number in the founder's head or the founding team's head about what this business is going to be worth. Maybe it's over beers or drinks on a sales trip, but there's some number that is sometimes spoken, but often unspoken, and you have to draw out what that number is. And typically, it's 5 times higher than the business is currently worth, sadly, because it takes entrepreneurs and people with a lot of optimism to do this, and they work their butt off for years and years and years. I mean, you know this. We have clients who have been in business not with Acresis, but have been established for 25 years. And so you say, well, should I get $1 million of enterprise value for every year I've been in business? So the way to do it professionally is there's 3 valuations. A fair market valuation, a good one, costs about $10,000. And there is the discounted cash flow, which is usually a pretty low number for scale up companies because they put all their cash back in back into the business. Um, the one that is harder also is book value. If you're in tech or tech-enabled services, you don't have warehouses and inventory, so your book value is pretty low. So those are good valuations for tax purposes. But the one you really want to know is comparables, just like when you sell your house on the market. What are other similar sized businesses? And unfortunately, founders don't know what that is. They can't get that data unless they have someone in the industry that's sold that can kind of tell them how it works. So normally you have to go to an investment banker that specializes in that. And you could read published research, but normally that, in our experience, inflates the founder's expectations of valuation. So if you get a fair market valuation, you get all three, you get a blended number, and that's usually a good starting point.
I totally agree. Totally agree. So on the way to that sort of valuation or on the way to scale up and growth, I'm sure you've experienced some major setbacks or failures. Can you share some of
Hmm.
those and how you overcame them?
Yeah, personally, I think the failures are in three fronts: capital, talent, and governance. So on the talent side, particularly with my first company, I thought with the right training and coaching and inspiration, anybody could do anything, and it was so naive. It basically turned out I was spending 90% of my time with the lowest 10% performers for like over a year. And it took a lot of scar tissue and experience for me to flip that ratio. Um, and also for the pay scale to match that as well, instead of being more egalitarian about it. Um, the second one is capital. My first company was undercapitalized. My second one was overcapitalized. Undercapitalized meaning, you have 3 months of payroll and cash on hand. And overcapitalized, you have $50 million in the bank and you don't know, how to deploy it. And the third one is governance, which is whether it's in your operating agreement and you're managing by members or it's a formal board of directors. To do that with foresight, with planning, have the right people on it, always have majority vote, not unanimous. If there's equal partners, there needs to be a tiebreaker. And in a company that I was advising, the governance and the board of directors was not as professional as it should have been, and they turned down some cash from a PE firm and an investment that ultimately put them out of business because they made the wrong decision. They made an entrepreneurial decision, not a financial banking decision.
Ouch. So speaking of private equity and funding, did you
Hmm.
personally seek funding? And if yes, what role did that play in your exit strategy?
So if you want to, if you're a young company, let's say 3 years or less, or a startup, and you want to exit in 5 years successfully, there's almost no way to do it without someone else's money. If you've been in business 10, 15, 20 years, there's a different route. And I call that the bootstrap route. But I'll start with the first one, which is um, if you're going to raise money, it is a full-time job. So who's going to do that for you? If it's not your full-time job and you don't live in Silicon Valley or work in Silicon Valley, you're not going to get the amount of money you want. You're not going to get the terms you want. And it's going to take a year. It's the hardest sales campaign you or your team will ever do. So use a fractional resource like a fractional former investment banker or CFO that's raised the money before. Um, and when you get that surplus of working capital, then you have the ammunition to weather dot com booms and to weather the Great Recession and to weather COVID and to weather inflation. You just, without that, you hunker down, you don't make bold investments, and you grow very, very slowly. And you think you're growing safely, but you're not safe. All your net worth is in one company. The way to bootstrap it effectively is to take some modest debt out from a local bank that understands you, or at least understands asset light businesses. For instance, you can take debt out on your annual recurring revenue. You can take debt out on your annual revenue. Also, friends and family are fantastic sources. And it's tough because your friends and family and business acquaintances want you to succeed. And they've often said, hey, if you ever need investment, let me know. But there's something about the humble founder that doesn't want to ask them for the money, not because they're seen as a failure. It's just, I don't want to let them down. I don't want to let my employees down. I can't face Uncle Joe if I just lost 50K of his money. But if you and your co-founders and management team put together the hit list of who might invest $50,000 to $250,000, normally that adds up to $500,000 to $3 million of potential investment. And the terms are much kinder, more benevolent, no personal guarantees. And that can get you through a year of really important investments. After that, you're really looking at mezzanine financing or minority PE or majority PE, which we can touch on later in this call.
No, that's definitely great advice, and I'm definitely in that category. I would feel horrible letting down a
Mhm.
family member by by losing their money. So while we considered it several times, we never pulled the trigger on it just because of that feeling. Which, in hindsight, they would have made out. Everybody would have won, but I'm too hesitant to do that.
It feels higher risk than it is, and it brings in a lot of factors that you don't necessarily want to have with your friends and family.
Exactly. So let's just switch gears a little bit. Talk about competition. How did you deal with competition in the businesses you're in, and what are some, tips and tricks and great ideas that you've heard from clients regarding dealing with competition?
The competition is usually not as fierce as you think. Um, and rarely, we talked about Acresis has helped 33 uh, clients exit. And what is important about that is I can only think of two where competition was a pain point, which is really odd, right? The reason is in the scale ups, and part of it's probably self selection with Acresis, but we try to pick companies where their customers love them and their employees love them. And as a result, their service delivery quality or SaaS software is really high quality. So, where they normally get blindsided is when a big player in their industry starts giving away something for free that's an important revenue contributor. But when there is a competitor and you know you can compete pretty well, um, then it gets down to your talent, sales talent and executive talent. So, and imagine you're in a room with the buyer, the chief procurement officer of Dow Chemical or DuPont, and you have one of your founders in the room, and you have your head of sales or subject matter in the room, and your competition's in the room. How do you measure up? Is your team the one that's creating the shock and awe? And I can't believe how much farther ahead these gals and guys are than that other team. So if you can't give your prospective buyer the contact information for your top three competitors with a smile on your face, then you're probably not very good and you need to change it. So one of my techniques has always been I give that information to the buyer because I'm very happy if it's going to be competitive. It often leads to a sole source situation, but they know I'm dealing squarely, fairly, and that I'm not afraid of the competition. And that really puts them on their back foot.
I love that. That's a very bold move. So you're saying like right there in the conference room after you've presented your product and or service and price, you say, "Here you go. Here's three names that you should be speaking with." to ensure that I am the best.
It's such an important decision. You'd be smart to talk to other people in a similar space. They're not as good as us, but you make that judgment.
I love that. That's great. That reminds me, I did something. We didn't do that because our customers knew who our competitors were. But my
Hmm.
favorite move in a sales presentation was handing out my card, saying, "Here's my contact information. I'm the CEO of the company, and unfortunately, you'll never hear from me, or you'll never contact me because my team is going to satisfy you so much." And
I love
customers
that.
loved when I closed with that, and my employees knew that if I pulled that one out, then they needed to deliver. They always did anyway, but it was nice to pull out that card.
Yeah. Well, again, when you've built a company where you know you're the best, it's not the sad thing about scale up companies is the market doesn't know they're the best. The market often doesn't even know who they are. They don't have the brand, they don't have the reach, they're not getting invited to the right kind of bidding opportunities and things. So if they get that chance, they usually knock it out of the park.
Now, you brought back some really interesting memories because our competition used the exact same strategy you just articulated. When they were up against us, the price automatically dropped to zero, and they can afford to do so
Hmm.
because they were a $4 billion company, and they can give the software that we competed against them away for free as long as a customer bought some other software from them. So it was often it was tough, but the smarter customers totally understood that you get what you pay for, and it really felt great when we won deals, and we won most of the time anyway. And when you win against free, it feels that much better.
It's a very important sales prospect criteria that's, if it's not explicit in your company's sales, it should be, because it's very hard to get the answer to, which is how sophisticated is the economic buyer, or how progressive they are. If they're a first timer, occasionally you can educate the first timer and they'll be dependent upon you and will kind of do what you say. But normally, you want someone who's sophisticated enough to know that it's going to cost a good fee in order to get this outcome I want, and it's less risky. And people who are giving stuff away from free make me really nervous. That's what a sophisticated buyer thinks.
Exactly. Exactly. Totally agree. So, going back to buyers, let's talk about buyers of businesses this time.
Mhm.
Walk me through the sales process. Obviously, you've done this multiple times for yourself, 33 times now with Acresis. Give the listeners and viewers just an idea of the sales process and the important steps.
I thought you might ask me this, so I went back and I looked at the milestones, and there's 19 of them of the sales process. Not one, not three, not five, but and for a smart seller, hopefully people listening to this podcast, you should give yourself 12 months to sell successfully, prudently, without disrupting your operations. And in order to do that, you normally have to start 2 years before that. But once you decide to sell, the clock is ticking. So you got 9 to 12 months to do it. The first thing you need to do is make sure you have preliminary, not final, preliminary answers for those 6 questions we talked about earlier. What's your exit date? What's your number? Have I done a proceeds waterfall? Do I have the right advisors? So that's a couple steps of the 19. You want to make sure you do that. And then if you can sell for in the US for more than $30 million, you want to hire a quality investment banker. If you're going to sell for less than 30 million, there are not quality investment bankers. There's brokers, former bankers who it's kind of a lifestyle business, but a quality banker is going to have a fee of $1 million, and they're going to earn that 3 to 5 times as much because they know who the buyers are. They've sold assets to them previously. They know what the multiples are. They know the valuations. They know the deal terms. But after you hire the investment banker, you still need someone to manage them. That could be a third party who is maybe a former investment banker, could be a CFO, could be a Acresis. You and I have done this many times,
Yep.
Stephen, and there's so many advisors whispering in the founder's ear. They just need to know what's in my best interest. As an example, an investment banker may have a great deal that surpasses the sales price. That's good for the banker because they get a 3% fee of that. But maybe the terms aren't best for the founder. Maybe the founder has to stick around for 2 or 3 years, and the founder doesn't want to do that. And also, it's a full-time job, and the founder usually has day duties they need to do. So if you can outsource some of that, we highly recommend you do that.
Yeah, I can't stress those 2 points enough. First, a lot of founders are sometimes penny wise and pound foolish, and it's very easy
Mm.
to look at that investment banker fee, which is 7 figures, and to say, "There's no way I need to pay 7 figures. My baby is worth a, gazillion dollars, and I'm gonna be able to sell
Right.
it on my own." But to your point, which is so valid, the ROI in the banker is going to be at least 2 to 3x, sometimes 4x more. So don't hesitate to sign them up and pay that 7 figure fee. It's very, very well worth it. And the second
Yeah.
point, which is also incredibly important, is the CEO's day job. The sales process is a full time job in and of itself. And it's so
Mhm.
vital not to take the eye off the ball because many deals do fall through, and it's important not to miss any of your monthly or quarterly forecasts during the process. And if you take your eye off the ball because you're focusing in on the sale, it's very easy to do so.
It's a good way to kill a great process is to have a poor quarter. Um, Back to the banker, something that you did and Acresis helped you with that is a best practice is to compete the selection of the banker. Don't go to a buddy or someone, like in real estate, a lot of times you ask for referrals, give me a real estate broker. This is super important. And you want to have at least two bankers compete, no more than six. Usually three is about right, because they will come in and pitch to you valuations, deal structures, buyer categories, and they'll tell you very nicely how ugly your baby is. Here's the deficiencies that we need to help repair. We're not going to lie, but we need to have a story for why you're not growing at 20% or why your EBITDA is less than 10%. So compete that, select the banker, then manage the banker. And to follow up, Stephen, on other milestones of the sales process. So when you get a banker, they create a teaser, which is a 1 or 2 pager marketing piece that they're going to send out to everybody and their brother, blind with an anonymous name. So it's not going to have your company name, but your competitors will figure it out. And then a month or two later, you're going to send out something called the CIM, Confidential Information Memorandum. Thinking in PowerPoint, think of a 40-slide deck that shows everything in your company that you actually didn't know before you hired the banker. It is a proctology exam that leads to a lot of enterprise value. And that may go out to 10 to 50. So we're looking at a funnel like a sales campaign. The teaser goes out to 100 to 200. You send SIMs out to 10 to 50. You get non-binding indications of interest. That's another milestone. So that gives you indicative pricing and who's really interested. Um, if you send out 50 SIMs, you might get 10 IOIs back. Then another 2 or 3 weeks go by and you get a binding exclusive letter of intent that the buyers want you to sign. You might have 1 to 4 of those. And if you sign that, you go into due diligence, which is another milestone. They say 30 days, the buyer, but they always take 45 to 60. And you're negotiating and doing the contracts. And then ultimately you close. And then there's also post-close activities like managing your performance earnouts or holdbacks and things like that. But when you look at all those stats for the 33 Acresis clients, and I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me, but Not every single one used a banker because some were under 30 million, but the ones that did, something like 2,000 teasers went out in the world for those 33. And the number of IOIs that came back were like 8% of that. And the number of LOIs was like 3% of that. So even though you've been advised by Acresis for 3 years, you have the right team, you know your number, you've upgraded your talent, you're doing all the things right, your baby's not that pretty. It's
That's a
very,
tough one to deal with.
very hard. It is. I mean, some founders get lucky and some alliance partner or big competitor just comes and buys you, but um, a really professional, best practiced, managed exit, if you get more than 4 LOIs, you're very fortunate. But your price, the price you get, and the certainty that you are going to sell, and the deal terms that you want for you and your management team is much, much better than the founder who sells to an inbound. Much better.
Right. Yeah, the last customer you and I worked with said something really astute. He, just like every founder, they had a number in mind, but at the end of the day, he was smart in saying that, you know what, once we go to market with the company, the market is going to tell me what my company is worth. So he had a number in mind. The market reacted for the most part very positively,
Hmm.
but he was smart in not being emotional, that the number that the market said his company was worth was just, you know, a little bit shy of what he thought, but still it was acceptable to him.
It's very important when you select a banker and you go to market that the banker knows what your minimum threshold is. Um, and also that you are going to sell for the right deal. And the deal is not just price, to your point. Once you fire that flare gun into the market, the flare, you're for sale. And if it comes in the range that you and your team and banker and Acresis have agreed is fair, because again, we've done fair market valuations, you better accept that deal for two big reasons. One is if you back out on a reasonable deal, that banker and other buyers put you in their CRM systems and you're pretty much tainted with a big scarlet A for at least a year, maybe 2 years. You can't go out again. The second thing that's more dangerous is anybody that holds equity in your business or has a deal incentive, and all of a sudden you tell them, yeah, we got a number, but I've changed my mind. The good ones leave. The ones that aren't so good stay. So you're in a bit of a hostage situation. You pretty much have to do the deal if it fits the criteria.
Absolutely. So the deal is done. What did you specifically do after your last deal was done? Did you stay with the acquiring company, or did you leave right away?
Yeah, so my first company was an IT market research firm, BPO market research firm, and I went with the deal for 6 months. And then I left to help start um, the world's first BPO company, which was something I'd been talking about for years. And there was an investor who finally put the money up to do it. But to be more pointed, I always started my next company about a year before I sold my current company. It turned out, I didn't know this. I turned out I was good at it. Um, I saw a market. People will work with me voluntarily multiple times, like version 2, version 3, version 4. So it wasn't that hard the second time, the third time, the fourth time. But what I've learned is not everybody's built like that. Most people aren't built like that. So when we advise founders from day one, when we meet with them, and you've observed this, Stephen, and contributed, is we talk about, well, what are you going to do once the company sells? Are you going to be on the board of directors? Are you going to stick with the business? Are you going to do philanthropy? And, founders who have bootstrapped for years and years haven't even had time to really think about it. They have some hobbies: golf, surfing, coaching their kids, church maybe. synagogue, but doesn't consume the amount of time that your business consumes. So the metaphor that we really like at Acresis is, Stephen, you're this beautiful boat harbor, and the size of that harbor is fixed. And there's a number of berths in that marina. The size of the berths you can change. You can make it one big aircraft carrier and there's only one berth, but you can't have more than 6 berths. And that's only if you're a super high performer, incredibly disciplined. I would link it probably, Stephen, when you're training for Ironman or climbing mountains, you really have to prepare and you better get it right. So we normally say, if you're going to stay with the business post-sale, that's 1 berth. Don't make any investments with your new money for 6 months to 12 months. We can talk about how to create a deflector shield for that from friends and family. Do not sit on more than 2 boards in the first year, preferably advisory boards, because they're less sticky than boards of directors and they don't always require you to write a check. So 1, where you're working still with your company but with a boss, and then 1 or 2 advisory boards for at least 12 months. And then after that, you can start taking things on or jettisoning them. Because otherwise, you make too many investments, you say yes to too many advisory board seats, and you're unhappy and you're busier than even when you were working, and you wonder why you're really unhappy and where all your proceeds went.
No, this is all fantastic advice. And I mean, the last 45 minutes have been chock full of fantastic advice for founders. Before we sign off, is there anything that you wanted to cover that I haven't asked yet?
I think for founders who have built a great business, and I define that as they're profitable, their employees really like them, and their customers really like them, can you do more good for those employees and yourself and your family and your community by doing that 3 or 4 times in your career? So my first company was 10 years. It should have been 5 years. So think of these as 3 to 5 year chapters in your life. And you don't always have to be CEO, as you described, Stephen. You can promote yourself and bring in someone that has the same value system and has been a CEO many times. You can start a second company. You don't have to be the subject matter expert. You don't have to be the CEO. You can be the executive chair of that. And you can do that for probably 2 companies at once and spread the wealth, spread the knowledge, take some of your best team members, populate them in these businesses. So what I'd like to communicate based upon those comments is, you don't have to be a one-trick pony. You can do this multiple times through age 40, 50, 60, 70, if it's something you enjoy doing.
That's fantastic advice. To basically take all or some of the chips off the table and bet on yourself to do it several times over, which I'm sure is incredibly rewarding.
It absolutely is. We are getting paid, but we are giving back. And most of the people that work at Acresis could be retired, but they love doing this. And seeing founders achieve that in a way that they want to achieve and not have it happen to them. Another topic, Stephen, is, when is it time to sell? We've talked about the good reasons for selling, but the bad reasons are, you have a partner that wants to sell and you can't stop them, or you have a partner that keeps scaring away all the best talent and you just have to sell for what you can get and get it over with and move on. Or 1 or 2 of the founders have a medical issue, or there's, a divorce or 2 going on, or there's a big bad competitor out there that's just cleaning you up. So all those things have happened to founders. And, Stephen, I don't know if you want to touch on buying out a partner or partners. You've done that. But I went through the Acresis portfolio of those 33. and a third of them have bought out at least one partner prior to exit.
Sure. I mean, we can probably spend an entire episode discussing partner buyouts because partnerships come in so many different flavors, from like legitimate equity partners to people that you have promised some equity over a beer on a napkin one day and everything in between. So yeah, probably too much to discuss in this episode, but it's definitely something. It's complicated, and definitely seek the advice of somebody that's done it before proceeding with a partner buyout would be my advice.
Yeah, buy the partner or partners out before you start your exit process.
Agreed. Totally agreed. Mark, you are a wealth of exit knowledge, having done it so many times yourself and with 33 clients. If anybody has any follow-up questions for you, I'm assuming LinkedIn is the best way to contact you.
Yes, or you can share my Acresis email for them if they'd like to do that.
Okay, great. So I'll share your LinkedIn profile as well as your Acresis email in the show notes below. And Mark, thank you very
Yeah.
much for joining me today. Thank you to the listeners for listening to this great episode, and look forward to speaking with you next time. That's a wrap for this episode of Built to Finish. Thank you for tuning in. For show notes and more details, head over to podcast.stephenpivnik.com. Special thank you to our sponsor, Acresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services that help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Catch you next week.